Blog Talk Radio. Carol the Coach. Sex, love, and relationships. We talk about it here.
Carol the Coach. Compassion with contemporary relevance.
I am a psychotherapist. I can be your personal life coach, and I can help you with your issues. There are no problems too small or too big. You can talk about anything.
Speaker, columnist, radio TV host, and commentator. Carol the Coach brings messages of wellness and empowerment within reach of everyday people every day.
Almost 5 years ago, I lost my soulmate in an accident. He was killed in a plane crash. Life just, for me, has seemed to stop.
There are groups all over the city. I teach one. It is a specific way to start thinking so that you shift how you see the world, which then shifts your energy, and then you feel better and you actually see things differently.
Carol the Coach, always available too at carolthecoach.com.
Now I've got Russell on the line.
I'm 47 years old. I'm a truck driver. I'm married. I have a wife in San Francisco.
Okay.
I haven't been home in 6 months. My thing is, I don't know if I have a sex addiction or what the problem is. Why do I want what I can't have? And as soon as I can have it, I don't want it anymore.
You're right on target when you say, I don't know if I have a sexual addiction. Well, guess what? Yes, you do. And you know what? That's my specialty, Russell, so you're at the right place. Continue.
I meet women online, and I'm in a different part of the country. I travel all 48 states, so I love sex.
I hear self-esteem issues. You never felt good enough, and you didn't feel like you were getting what you should have then, and you're reenacting that now. Do you want to change that about yourself?
Hi, I'm Carol Jurgensen-Sheets, and people know me as Carol the Coach, and this is a show that we do every Monday night that talks about a very serious subject that is not available anywhere else on iTunes or on Blog Talk Radio, and that is sexual addiction. So I am pleased to be with you tonight. I actually feel very honored because I know if you're listening to the show, you either A, believe you might suffer from sexual addiction, or B, love somebody who you sense may have a sexual addiction. And so you can always call me at 646-595-3284, and I will help to answer any questions you have about what is sexual addiction. And tonight, I'm pleased that we're going to be talking with Alexis Polles, and she is actually a proponent of 3-day intensive for couples with sexual addiction. And so you say, what is an intensive for couples, and what does it mean to spend 3 days of your life going through the workshop? Well, Alexis is going to be sharing with us what that process involves and why she feels like it is one of the most comprehensive treatment modalities one can do to kickstart your treatment program with sexual addiction, not only for the sex addict, but also for the partner. And let's face it, oftentimes, if you are an addict, you must realize that services are available to you, and yet your partner is hurting too, and so we need to help assess what services are best for the partner. I have always said that although it is the sex addict that carries the shame, it is the partner who carries the trauma, and oftentimes resulting in post-traumatic stress. So it's always nice when there is a program available to both you, sex addict, and your partner. That way you two can talk about things together, you can work through things, and you can figure out what is it that you need next after the 3-day intensive. And Alexis has a lot of expertise in this area. She has been working with sexual addiction for years. She also works with other addictions like gambling and chemical addiction. And really looks at family of origin issues that have contributed to the problem. And if you've listened to this show, you absolutely know that I believe one of two things. Either you've had, as an addict, a family of origin issue that has contributed to this problem, or you're one of the few, but still the many, who has been involved in a behavior that has become very much a habit disorder. We do have men and women who have started to look at pornography, and they have no family of origin issues, they have no trauma, but because they've gotten in the routine of looking at pornography every evening from 11 to 1, they have created a habit that progressively gets worse. Now, if that's you, believe it or not, you may consider yourself lucky, because what you have to do is interrupt that pattern and find healthy substitutes to old behaviors. There's not any deep psychological work that you need to do. You actually have to do cognitive behavioral therapy and symptom substitution. And although that in itself can be tough, it doesn't deal with the deep psychological wounding that can occur for lots of people who have experienced this trauma. The trauma of being physically, emotionally, or sexually abused in your childhood. The trauma of having been neglected and not knowing how to meet those needs. The trauma of being in a neighborhood where somebody took advantage of you. They exploited you. Maybe it was the babysitter. Maybe it was a relative in the neighborhood. So think about your life. Have you experienced a trauma that was very problematic, that more than likely you held as a secret, or have a lot of these behaviors just occurred because you got into the habit of doing something, and before you knew it, the habit took over? Now, you know that I'm a big proponent of being a certified sexual addictions therapist, because so many people do not know what to do with sexual addiction. So I cannot emphasize how important it is to really have education, and this specialty requires that you know what resources are available in the community that will be an adjunct to good psychotherapy. And I'm not saying there aren't some great therapists out there, but if they have never heard of a 12-step program, if they've never heard of treating this with addiction materials that are based on the big book, AA, then they're more than likely not able to meet some of your needs. Now, I recently received an email from a listener who said, "Hi, Carol. I'd like to hear you discuss willingness and commitment to do recovery work. Get serious," he says. "I'm embarrassed to describe, and I'm very self-critical at my start/stop recovery and what feels like pseudo-recovery. I wonder if I'm white-knuckling it. I wonder if I really want to do therapy and recovery." He says, "I've been, quote-unquote, trying hard since 2008. I love that he put that word trying in quotations. You probably heard me say last week and the week before that when one of my clients ran into Patrick Carnes at an alumni engagement, she said, Patrick, I'm really trying this time. I'm taking it so much more seriously. And he said, trying? I don't believe in the word trying. You either do it or you don't. Well, now that's a quote from a client of mine. And I know what Dr. Carnes was saying. He's basically saying, once you're absolutely serious to doing the work of recovery, you'll do whatever it takes. Now, this person says, I know it is a process, and each of us have our own path and time. I guess I would like to have this moment of deep personal realization that I have but one life, and I will do whatever it takes. Boy, I've got to tell this person that I so agree with that. As a matter of fact, I'm constantly telling people this is not a dress rehearsal. You know, this may be the only life you have, so you have to act with conviction on it. He says, unfortunately, oftentimes while I'm trying, I will breach my fears and experience some major shift in my disposition. I have heard and read about people who have reached their personal bottom. They experienced a sense of brokenness that flipped them to see, and perhaps more importantly, honest remorse and pain for what brokenness that flipped them to figure out what significant changes they need to make in their lives. I know some men are in my group, and they're there because of legal reasons or because of an angry spouse. Others are there because they want a better life, and they're weary and in some personal emotional pain that compels them to do whatever it takes. Well, I'm 54, and I'm seeing the debris in my life, and I'm troubled and overwhelmed as to know how I can have a normal, purposeful, meaningful, emotionally connected life. In my recovery groups, I sense those that have crossed over some unseen barrier and share experience, strength, and hope that causes me to feel frustrated and hopeless about myself. I realize that I should be thinking and feeling hope and gratitude. Hope that I can be where they are one day, and gratitude that they are where they are in healing. There seems to be this switch where certain people have internally thrown the internal switch and are all in and seeking recovery and reality at all costs. I know that I can feel the difference between a forced promise and a free choice. I've come to realize rather slowly that sex addiction recovery is much more than sobriety. I'm not sure if it is just old thinking or lack of motivation or procrastination or maybe a combination of the both. I'm not experienced enough of the good stuff of recovery to suck me into a commitment to do my work daily and start living the steps. Okay, this is an email from Tom, and I got to tell you, Tom is dead on. He absolutely understands that he has not made the absolute commitment to take his life to the next level and to be all that he can be. And what I mean by that is that he's dabbling with, he's flirting with actual recovery. And unfortunately, he is not able to make the commitment that it takes today to make his life much more meaningful. So I would say to Tom, oh, Tom, you really have to make the commitment and stick with it to change the behaviors, because your life is not going to get any better. And you can hear from the email that he is not satisfied with his life right now. He wants more out of life. He is desirous of it, but he's not willing to do what it takes. Now, for those men and women that don't know what it takes to get healthy, I say develop a strong recovery plan. I would ask Tom, do you have a good sponsor with lots of recovery? Do you hang with men in SA or SAA that have solid recovery? I'm not talking about the guys that, you may be friends with, but they slip every 1, 2, or 3 days. Are you hanging with people, with the fellowship that has good, solid recovery? Are you reading SA or SAA, the book? Because that is kind of the Bible for your recovery. Are you reading it? You should be reading it every single day, never missing a day. You should be praying. And if you're agnostic or atheist, you should be meditating. You should be spending quiet time asking yourself, what do I need to do next? And when you do that, and you are going to a meeting perhaps 3, 5, 7 times a week, especially if you're wavering, increase your meetings. If you're in an area that doesn't have meetings, then there are plenty of telemeetings that you can participate in weekly to make up that quota. It's all about doing the work. You aren't always going to have to do this amount of work, but to kickstart your recovery and to solidify it, it is imperative that you do it. You do it with rigorous honesty, and you do it in a way that absolutely takes you to that next level, so that your behaviors are so strong, your recovery gets better. It substitutes for the actual behaviors that you're trying. Oh, did I say that word, trying? Take that back. You are substituting behaviors so that the old behaviors are falling away. It's a lot of work initially. It's a commitment. But when you do it, it works. And that is my promise to you. So, Tom, it's like you have the insight. I even think you knew the answer. You just needed to have me reinforce how important that is. And then, for many of you, you know what the 3 circles is all about. It comes from the 12-step program. And the outer circle are healthy sexual behaviors. And healthy sexual behaviors mean that you exercise, you communicate with your partner, you go out on dates, you do other forms of self-care, you have friendships, you work on those. What does self-care mean to you? What do you do to take care of you? Is that you participate in sports, you play sports, you attend sports? Does that mean that you read the Bible? Read about Buddhism? What do? Does that mean that you take long, warm, hot showers and really spend time nurturing the body in other ways? Oftentimes, people ignore their self-care, and that just isn't going to work. You have to know what it takes to make your life different. And so I highly recommend that you work diligently on doing those things that are necessary to pursue rigorous recovery. And, of course, I say have a sponsor that can guide you through the 12 steps. You've got to work those 12 steps. Now, people will say, I don't believe in the 12 steps. I don't believe in God. I don't think I can get there. Well, there's a way to do the 12 steps without believing in God. But if you don't believe in God, or if you don't believe that the 12 steps are right for you, then by all means, look into another program. For instance, Recovery Nation. That's an online, internet, sexual addiction program that teaches you the proper recovery skills. Very important. Every week you have lessons, and you go through those lessons, and then you may choose to hire a coach. And that recovery coach is somebody with a good sense of sobriety. Okay, if that's not your thing, there are other programs that can be helpful. Smart Recovery. I'm in the Indianapolis area, and Smart Recovery has one meeting per week here in Indianapolis. But I have some guys that do that, and they get a lot out of it. They also have telemeetings, so they can supplement the one meeting with other meetings. It's more of a cognitive behavioral therapy type approach. It teaches you how to do thought stopping, how to distract yourself, and how to create a life where sobriety and recovery is important. So there you go. Those are all ways that you can absolutely have better recovery. I'm Carol the Coach. This is Sex Help with Carol the Coach. And we have a caller on the line. Is this Alexis?
It is.
Excellent. I'm glad that we were able to connect because you have a lot to offer. You are really experienced in recovery. You know exactly what people need to do if they have sexual addictions, and you work with a variety of addictions. Is that not right?
Yes, I do. I work with substance dependence, gambling, and sexual addiction primarily. I've also worked with eating disorders as well and continue to do so.
Boy, and oftentimes when we're working with sexual addiction, we see that they fuse with other addictions like gambling or eating disorders. So it's so helpful that you have expertise in all of those areas, and you're really a proponent of what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is the 3-day intensives for couples. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about your life and as well as addiction in general.
Okay.
How long have you been working with people with sex addiction?
With people with sex addiction, over 25 years.
Oh, my goodness. And where did you get your initial training?
I got my initial training in the School of Hard Knocks, actually. I was in chemical dependency treatment and pretty quickly realized that there were people with compulsive sexual behaviors. And the unit that I was consulting with at the time, actually the medical director and their psychology director had both been trained with Dr. Carnes, so it actually occurred around the time that Dr. Carnes' trainings were really getting going in the early days.
Well, what year was that? I mean, when did that all begin?
Okay, that would have been about the late 80s and early 90s.
Yes, and boy, Dr. Carnes has been through so much. I mean, when he first started talking about sexual addiction, you and I both know that people really laughed him out of the business. They said there was no such thing, this wasn't an issue, this was just bad behavior, and they thought
Absolutely.
he was making an excuse. It was like they didn't understand the addictive qualities to sexual addiction.
Actually, that continues today in the therapy world. say a little bit more about that?
Absolutely.
Well, I think that, first of all, people were not talking about sexual behavior in addiction treatment. They weren't talking about it much of anywhere except with typically with sexual offenders in those circles. But in terms of trying to get an understanding of what was going on in people's lives that was continuing to make it unmanageable, even when they were in recovery from other addictions, there was no one leading that piece of work until Dr. Carnes came forward, really.
And so, Alexis, you have your CSAT?
I do.
And what made you decide to go ahead and become a certified sexual addictions therapist?
Well, actually, I was working at a facility where Dr. Carnes came in to open up a program, a residential program. And so one of the opportunities that allowed several of the staff members to have access to was to CSAT training. And I must say that not any of the other, I'm trying to think if any of the other psychiatrists engaged in that training, and I don't think they did. I was just very interested, had been seeing it for a long time, and wanted to have more in-depth look at it from true experts in the field and leaders in the field, and so I jumped on the opportunity.
And so what models do you currently use since you've been in this field for over 25 years?
The current models that I use are an addiction approach, typically. Now, there is no such diagnosis in our diagnostic manual as sexual addiction. And, of course, there's no diagnosis named drug addiction either. But this complex array of behaviors and thoughts and patterns in life tend to be described in terms of addictive behavior. So I use 12-step approaches, which also includes cognitive behavioral therapy. I use cognitive behavioral therapy. I include some dialectical behavior work, and, of course, a focus on couples and family work.
Okay, and what do you mean by dialectical forms of treatment?
Dialectical behavior therapy is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy that has been developed by Marsha Linehan, initially to treat people with very destructive behavior, self-destructive behavior patterns in the form of a diagnosis called borderline personality disorder, where there's significant emotional dysregulation and then dysregulation of behavior. The same approaches have been successfully applied to substance dependence and other behaviors in the arena of addictions. The dialectical piece is a philosophical sort of stance that says that things occur in human relationships in terms of a dialectic, which is a tension. And the primary dialectic is between acceptance and change, which, of course, we hear a lot about in the recovery world.
Yes, and, you know, I have worked with people that were recommended to go through DBT, or that dialectical behavioral therapy, and they don't have the disorder of borderline personality disorder. So how might they be appropriate for somebody who has a sexual addiction?
The way that I see it applied is that, number one, none of the things skills that are taught with DBT really they enhance our understanding of a 12-step approach. So instead of telling someone you just need to accept this, which can be very invalidating, there are specific steps to think through and to begin to enact to begin to be able to practice acceptance. And so the approach is taught in terms of learning behavioral skills that the person did not develop for whatever reason, be it biological or social, or a combination of the two, so that their reactions and their activities, which may seem very unusual to observers, actually make total sense in terms of the way that they were raised or the biology that they inherited. And so it's a way of understanding that the behaviors make sense in terms of trying to self-regulate, but they become very destructive over time.
Well, let's give the listening audience an idea of what some of those behaviors might look at. If you're a sex addict, and what behaviors might you look at?
Well, you might look in several arenas. Typically, the behaviors will be, and right now I'm talking about behavior in terms of thought, feelings, and actions. So the whole gamut of things I'm including as behavior. So the behavior might include things like an inability to calm oneself through the use of typical means, such as distracting or being able to modulate one's emotions, usually rooted in childhood. So it's not unusual, let's say, for a person with sexual addiction to have grown up in a setting in which there was some kind of dissonance in the household, whether it be arguments between the parents, neglect because the parents were involved in their own issues, difficulty with attaching with a primary caregiver that was reliable, consistent, and non-shaming. And so the child doesn't have really a chance to develop the brain pathways and lay down the brain pathways that are typically formed in, let's say, a healthier individual eventually. And so they do what's available to them. So if a child is lying in his or her bedroom, let's say, and the parents are yelling at one another in the next room and they feel scared and alone, most of us will rub against our genital area and we'll notice that there's a sensation that goes along with that. And so that becomes paired with a way to distance them from the fear that they're feeling and the being overwhelmed by their parents yelling and screaming at one another, and it becomes paired with a sense of pleasure or arousal and relief. And so then the child, who's not learning other ways of dealing with things because they don't have the opportunity or the role models to be able to learn those things, continues to use that behavior, which tends to work for a period of time. But over time, the behaviors may become compulsive, and the only or the primary way that the person has to deal with unusual emotions and feelings that come up. And that lays down abnormal or unusual pathways in the brain that sort of short-circuit the forebrain or the thinking part of the brain, or the part that's used for creativity and thinking, critical thinking. And the limbic part of the brain, which is the midbrain, takes over in that situation. And the thinking is sort of upside down in that the area of the limbic part of the brain is telling the person, not consciously, but is telling the person, if you don't act out, then you're not going to survive. And so things get turned upside down in that way when an addiction develops. Now, the typical behaviors that one might see would be compulsive masturbation or use of pornography, or very typical ones. Other things might be fantasy sex or falling in love over and over again, perhaps even with people that are destructive to the individual. So a whole array of behaviors can be seen around sexuality and love, if you will.
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is some of those maladaptive, self-soothing behaviors were just that. They were coping mechanisms initially, but then they become avoidance. They help the person avoid really feeling the feelings and doing something differently about that. And that's what then entrenches our clients into other maladaptive behaviors, because that can progress.
I would agree with that. Yes, I think that's a very succinct way to put it.
Now, you are a big believer in 3-day intensives with couples, and I so admire this work because I love it that the addict and the partner can get help at the same time. So talk a little bit about your 3-day intensives.
Okay. So this typically involves a couple, and it's an incredible process to witness and be a part of. The idea of working with the couple rather than separately with the addict and the spouse actually evolved out of my work with chemical addictions, and then also with work on a more intense residential unit with sexual addictions, where a family member might come in for 3 to 5 days for an intensive, and there were some work together, but typically not too much, and then the process carried on afterwards. Hopefully, if they made it through the residential treatment process and stayed together, but I find this much more powerful for the couple. And typically we focus on learning more about the addictive behaviors and also focusing on the overwhelming and devastating trauma that the spouse goes through when they begin to discover their partner, whom they thought they knew and trusted, has really betrayed their trust and the relationship. And so it's a very scary time for everybody. There's a lot of pain going on, and the amount of healing and reconciliation that can occur is pretty remarkable. So it's very intense individual and couples work. There are no other couples involved. It's just one couple at a time over a 3-day period that includes a therapeutic, clinically used polygraph test.
Okay, so you're going to have to explain this, because here I was thinking the intensives were a variety of couples that joined together to learn this work, but you're saying this is one couple at a time.
Yes.
They come in and they talk about their trauma, they talk about their experience, and then you also add on a polygraph test. And what do you find that accomplishes for the couple?
It actually can move things along very rapidly, because what we want is for the acting out partner to pass the polygraph, basically. We want to give the relationship a level of honesty that has probably never been there. And it allows the person who's acting out to be completely honest about who they are and what they've done and how that's affected themselves and others, probably for the first time in their lives, many times. And it's gone through their history's gone through in excruciating detail before they ever do the polygraph test. And then the polygraph test is done with the input from the spouse who's been injured. And the spouse can request that questions be answered and so forth. So the first thing is safety. And we want to make sure that the acting out hasn't endangered the life of the spouse, and in terms of high-risk sexual behavior that's not been protected and so forth. And then we want to look at other things that may have been hurtful or harmful. What we find is that it's very overwhelming under any circumstances, but when the story comes out piecemeal, or the the spouse asks, is that everything? I really need to know everything. And she has a right to know everything, or he has a right to know everything, in my opinion. And the person says yes, and then something else is discovered later. And typically the addict is doing that because they want to protect the spouse. They don't want to hurt the spouse. That's been my experience. But what they don't realize is that doing it that way is much more painful, prolongs the process, and deepens the trauma more and more, so it just piles on.
And have you learned this model from anybody in particular?
I have. My mentor is a wonderful fellow, very experienced therapist.
I know who it is.
Uh-huh.
Is it Milton? Is it Dr.
It
Magnus?
Is Dr. Milton Magnus.
Oh, I know. He's absolutely wonderful, and
he is. And he's written a book and workbook and a series of videos, some of which are available on YouTube, that really are an assistant in getting people prepped, so to speak, to come to the intensives.
So if people are interested in working with you and going through this 3-day intensive with couples, they probably can get a good idea from speaking with you and getting the information you send them, as well as I would imagine that you send them to Dr. Magnus's site or to YouTube to get a little bit of information.
I absolutely do. Yes, I absolutely do. Excuse me.
No, I was going to say, and, clearly I think that this is one of the best intensives for couples in the country.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah. How do people find you? How do they know about you?
Well, I can be reached through my email address or my telephone number. I have a website, but my new website with the intensives is actually still under construction. So if they go to that website, they're going to see under construction. But my email address is recoverythatlasts.com. It's A.G. Polles at recoverythatlasts.com. My phone number is 601-255-5485.
Say that number one more time.
601-255-5485. They can also just Google my name typically, and that's Alexis Polles, Polles, MD.
All right, Polles, MD. Yeah, because that's what I was thinking as you were sharing, that they could find you at A.G. Polles, A Recovery That Lasts, which, by the way, I love that, because truly this technique that you're using, this process that you're doing with couples, then cleans up any of the mistrust. I mean, it really allows for partners and spouses to get absolutely clean with all information so that they can rebuild and start over again.
Yes.
So now, why do you prefer this way of working?
I think it provides people very individualized care. It allows me to really focus on one couple or one individual of the couple at a time, and there's no other distractions. So they have total attention, and their issues are addressed. I find that very liberating for me as a therapist and psychiatrist, in that I can really pay attention without any interruptions from any other any other couples that I'm dealing with or any other issues that I'm dealing with. It actually speeds up the process, in my experience, of therapy, because it's individualized and it's intense, and you're doing it with the person that you really want the primary repair to be with, and that's with your partner. And that base, that foundation, then can serve as a a building block for other relationships, other family relationships and working relationships and so forth that need to be included in your recovery process, whatever the circumstances may be. So it speeds up the process. It's highly individualized, and I think, and it works. You know, it works. It really is transformative for most people that I work with.
So recommend the book that Dr. Magnus has written for anybody who wants that hope, strength, and recovery through this special model that you provide.
Yeah, he has written a book called Stop Sex Addiction. Stop Sex Addiction. And then his workbook is 30 Days to Hope and Freedom. And his website is hopeandfreedom.com.
Because, again, if anybody's wondering about this work, I know that Dr. Magnus highly endorses the people that he has trained, and you are one of those people. And it is so rare for a psychiatrist who typically does medication management to jump out of that box and work specifically with people. So tell us and the listening audience, what made you decide to go into this field, and more importantly, how'd you get out of that model of medication management and take this work to the next level?
Those are really good questions. And, you know, when you work as a physician and you begin prescribing psychotropic medications, you look at the studies, the results really are not very impressive in terms of the recovery rates. Certainly they're better than nothing with moderately severe to severe depression, very much better than nothing with true bipolar illness or a psychotic disorder. But for most people, medications are significantly lacking, and when they are effective, the array that we have right now have extremely serious side effects. And so there's a big missing piece, and I think psychiatry has really sold themselves short by moving towards a medical model to try to be accepted by the wider medical community as being true doctors or real doctors. They've sort of sold themselves short by moving away from our roots as therapists towards prescribing pills that really are, again, very lacking and can have some very serious side effects. Now, I'm not anti-medicine if it's indicated, but I think other approaches are needed and generally, at least for the population that I work with, more powerful. And, of course, I started out with chemical addiction, and there the use of medications is not as liberal as in some other psychiatric diagnoses. And so that's a model that I was trained in and just expanded from there.
Okay, so obviously, being a psychiatrist, you have worked with a wide range of people, and you've just shared why you felt compelled to go the extra mile and to step out of that box and work with people, you know, individually and in these intensives. Now, tell us a little bit about your work with gambling addiction.
Okay. As you said, gambling and all of these addictive behaviors can coexist, they can interact, or a person can move from one to the other. And again, when you work with an addictive population, you're going to begin to see other addictions. Frequently, gambling is fused with alcohol, especially in men. And also, I live in the Gulf Coast area, where gambling always took place, even when it was illegal in other parts of the country. There were some counties in the state that I'm in that had legalized gambling, and then eventually the state legalized gambling again for the entire state, with some constraints, obviously. And so I'm in an area where there's a lot of gambling available, and so the incidence of out-of-control gambling goes up in that situation when it's more available for people who have a predisposition for addictive behavior. And this happens to be the way it shows itself for a lot of people. And, of course, women is it's more prevalent in terms of slot machine use and so forth. And that's very, it's not uncommon in older women to begin to go out to the casinos for entertainment and to have company, so to speak, to be with other people, and then get hooked on the gambling, on the one-armed bandits.
Well, absolutely. And so, you were referencing a big word that maybe not everybody understands, a predisposition. So what puts people at risk for having a predisposition, which means that you have the tendency from the get-go to have a gambling addiction?
Yeah. Well, typically in these disorders, there are biological underpinnings. Now, how strong the biological underpinnings are depends on what studies you look at and what substance or behavior you're looking at. But there's a biological component, genetic component, and then there's a social and psychological component, as well as a cultural component. So, again, availability is going to increase the incidence. So we've talked a little bit about the possibility of childhood trauma or neglect. That's definitely a risk factor. Biologic relatives with the illness are a risk factor. Mood disorders are a risk factor, particularly for gambling, although when you look at studies, the incidence of, or the comorbidity, the coexistence, I won't use a medical term, the coexistence of gambling with bipolar disorder diagnosis is elevated. However, once you get the gambler out of the compulsive behavior and start settling his or her brain down, they may not have a bipolar disorder once they are in a stable recovery process, but they look like they do. So that has to be observed over time. But mood disorders are a risk. Anxiety disorders are definitely a risk for all addictive behaviors. So those are all risk factors. And in wide and huge population studies, of course, lower socio-demographic areas and poverty are risk factors as well for addictive behaviors. However, it really knows no boundaries in terms of who it affects and how much money they make, or, if they come from a, quote, good family or bad family, or all of those things. It really doesn't discriminate on those lines. The disease of addiction doesn't.
Well, and it's interesting how it lights up the brain in the exact same way as sexual addiction, as overeating, as drugs, as alcohol. It's amazing that reward center is alive when people gamble, when they do drugs, and when they are involved with sex.
Absolutely. The common pathway is to dopamine, rewarding the reward system. So it is across all addictive behaviors in terms of what's the final common pathway at this point.
Well, that makes total sense. Now, you obviously have expertise in a lot of disorders that you have studied forever. I mean, you really understand family of origin issues, and you have done DBT. You are skilled at sexual addiction. You've been the medical director of recovering dentists and veterinarian programs. You really made it your mission to reach out to people who are susceptible to all types of addiction. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And certainly that started for me very early in my career. in my medical career, I thought that I guess it was in medical school when I did my psychiatry rotations. I thought I was given feedback. You really have a knack for this, but I thought, no, I don't want to be a psychiatrist. I want to be a real doctor. But then I couldn't avoid it. It just kept, or God kept presenting it in front of me, and opportunities presented themselves, and it just seemed that that's the pull that I was destined for, and I'm really thankful for it. And even in psychiatry, I was working with addictions, and then I decided, this is too hard, it's too painful. Certainly, there's a high number of suicides and so forth, and devastation in addiction of any variety. And I decided this is too painful, this work is too painful, I'm just going to work with psychiatry. So I parked myself on an inpatient psychiatric unit. But the funniest thing was that 75% of everybody I was seeing actually had an addictive disorder as well as possibly other things. And I thought, well, I think this is a message that I really need to be doing this work, and I'm very grateful that I have the opportunity to do so. It's the most intense but rewarding journey to be able to see someone turn their lives around. And
I bet.
Yeah.
Well, did you run into any resistance with the medical community? Because obviously you were wanting to go that extra step. It wasn't just medication management. You wanted to help people, and let's face it, based on your skills, that may not be the most advantageous way of making money for you.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. I've been really fortunate, though, in the medical community that I'm in. I've been around here a long time, and so it does take, you have to prove yourself over and over again, and I did a lot of hospital-based work, and so I got to know a lot of my colleagues around here. Some of them just disagree and that kind of thing. They have their own opinions. But for the most part, the medical community gets people with out-of-control addictions and really don't know what to do with them. And so they're kind of glad to have somebody that they can say, well, she's the addiction doctor, go see her,
Absolutely. Well, I am so fortunate to have gotten to talk with you tonight, and I'm sure our listening audience feels comfortable having heard that you, a medical doctor, have made it your mission to help people with all types of addiction. Again, if they want to reach you, they can go to AGPO, and let me get this spelling right, LLES, Recovery That Lasts.
At Recovery That Lasts.
And that is the website that they can actually reach you at, or they can give you a call at 601-255-5485.
That's correct.
All right. Any parting words that you want to tell our listening audience before we end for tonight?
Just that I really appreciate them for listening to your show and you for having the show. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for people to be able to understand more about the issues that they or a loved one has and to learn how to do something about it. And that's the message, is that this is a very treatable illness.
I agree. Well, thank you so much, Alexis, and all the best to you, and I hope to see you at many workshops and symposiums to come.
Same here, Carol. Thanks a lot.
All right. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
And we have to end for tonight, but as always, so only be one of you at all times, so fearlessly have the courage to be yourself. We'll see you next week.